Hello and welcome to this episode of Geopolitics with Swasti with our consulting editor and foreign policy expert, Swasti Rao. So this week started with Qatar and India holding a bilateral meeting and announcing a strategic partnership. Prime Minister Modi even broke protocol by greeting the Emir at the airport. And so one of our members actually had this question for you, Swasti. I thought this would be a good place to begin. At Aditya18893 asks, what according to you is the place of Qatar in India's foreign policy? How can India benefit from a nation like Qatar?
Well, it's a very good question, and for a change, it's a different side of the world, so we must talk about it. It's a very important part of the world for us. Now, very quickly, you said that he broke protocol and he went to receive the emir himself. I mean, there's reason, right? I mean, you know that there was a huge controversy before I come to why Qatar was important. There was a huge controversy when 8 of India's former navy personnel were arrested there on charges of espionage, and they were spying for the Israeli. I mean, those were the charges, and they were given a death sentence. And then the entire Indian MEA establishment, Dr. Jaishankar, whether it was Prime Minister Modi, they just worked very hard to convince the Emir to pardon them, and he did. So, without getting into the details of it, I think that calls for a very special treatment to the Emir. And this is the second time that the Emir is coming to India. The first time he came was in 2015, which is much before the controversy. But for sure, it is a special relationship, and not just because he pardoned. But that was, I just wanted to put that into perspective, that that has also deepened the mutual trust and the mutual, and especially from India's perspective, it has really sort of elevated the status of Qatar. And as you can see, that this time around, when the Emir was here, the two sides have elevated their ties to a strategic partnership. In the Gulf region, Qatar is the fifth country with whom we have a strategic partnership now. The other four countries are very easy to guess. It's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, and Kuwait. So, of course, with Qatar, it's kind of, that arc is complete in many ways. So, I mean, that's that. So, it is a wonderful relationship. Now, what makes it so special? There are a few factors, Vandana. The first factor is that, of course, energy dependence is huge, So, and especially for our LNG,
Yeah.
right? The total bilateral trade between India and Qatar is to the tune of about 14 to 15 billion dollars, and out of which half of it is more than half of it is LNG alone.
LNG, yeah.
And what makes Qatar so important for India's energy security? Not that India is only buying from Qatar, but what makes Qatar so special for India is that Qatar sometimes gives and offers massive discounts to India. And sometimes, if you were to Google, you'll also see that Qatar has gone to the extent of giving discounts as high as 50%.
Yeah.
Okay, so and why do the Qatari side, why do they do it? They do it because they also want to invest in a long term energy partnership with India, because India's energy needs are massive. India is a massively growing economy, and for our economy we are still very much dependent on these sources.
Almost half of India's LNG in the year 2023, I think, came from Qatar.
Yeah.
Almost half. That's a huge chunk.
I mean, that's a huge number. So yes, energy is definitely the backbone of our bilateral trade, but then that's just one aspect. And I told you, the Qatar has been given such great discounts to India. Now, in this particular visit, the two sides have taken a lot of important decisions. You can go and read the joint statement, but they have signed a number of MOUs. They have also decided to double the bilateral trade from currently, the way it stands at about 14, 15 to almost 30 billion in the next 5 years, which is I think a very ambitious and but yet in a very achievable target. Not just that, they have signed something called they have revised a double taxation avoidance agreement in order to make the economic ties more conducive. And importantly, from India's perspective, because we have been struggling with getting FTIs, and Qatar has promised a 10 billion worth of FTI in India over the next 5 years again. And Qatar has very I would say strong sovereign wealth bonds, and that's what the sovereign wealth fund, I'm sorry, and that's what they are trying to basically channelize into India. So those are all good news, but then that's just one factor. The other factor that makes Qatar so special is the fact that more than 700,000 Indian people live in Qatar, and remittances then become such a huge source for India. And in one of the print, Geopolitics, which was the episode, I had also explained how India is earning more from remittances than it is from FDI.
Yeah.
And Qatar is one of the top 5, top 6 countries up after US, UK, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So those reasons also make Qatar very important and the diaspora out there. But then there's more. There's also defense ties. Not many people know that India and Qatar, especially in the realm of Navy, we hold our joint exercises. They are called Zair al-Bahar, and this is a joint exercise between the Indian Navy and the Qatari Navy. Similarly, India and Qatar have signed a defense MOU on defense cooperation way back in 2008, but nothing much happened. Although in 2019 or very recently, they kind of extended it to another 5 years. And they are also holding something which is called Doha International Maritime Defense Exhibition and Conference. So what I'm saying is that there are many dimensions to India and Qatar relationship. But I think the thing that you need to understand there is that all these things you can find on Google, but there's something that is going to benefit your understanding about India and Qatar relations is that, see, please understand that Qatar and Saudi Arabia don't get well, don't get along, okay? And from India's perspective, we play a balancing game. So from India's perspective, we are trying to balance our ties, not only with Saudi Arabia, UAE, the big players, but also Qatar and Kuwait. I mean, Qatar, of course, has a special reason, and I'll give you the reason if you want. It's very interesting. But also Iran, So from India's perspective, we want to balance our ties, right? From Qatar's perspective, they also sort of, like I said, that they also see that India has a balancing power. So India also balances between US and Russia and China. By the way, Qatar also hosts a US military base, okay, where there are, UK and British and Australian forces. So I guess that temperament is something which is very close. And also one important thing that often gets missed when we are discussing these bilateral ties is that Qatar is one country in the middle, in the GCC, that doesn't really attach too many conditionalities, right? It doesn't really lecture India publicly on the status of Kashmir or, for example, the status of minorities, etc. That a lot of other, like for example, with Saudi Arabia, we have these undercurrents, okay? So we don't have such undercurrents with Qatar, and that makes the relationship, a tread in a very smooth geopolitical space. So not that the problems are not there, but when the problems come, I think they also deal with it in a very mature manner, and that this understanding that the two sides have, I think that is the beauty of the Indian and Qatari relationship. That despite all odds, both of them are actually playing the game of balancing very well. And if you want to understand the trivia, there's also another interesting thing that the current one of the prominent energy ministers of Qatar, his father, okay, who was the first ambassador to India when Qatar became independent, etc. So the little trivia is that the energy minister's father was Qatar's ambassador to India, and as a child, that minister had spent time in India, and often he speaks about it from different platforms, and he knows some Hindi movie songs as well. So you see that element of soft power, Indian soft power there as well.
That's really interesting. Well, thanks for that interesting tidbit. We have another question from Anubhav Saxena who says, don't you think the Trump administration is going a little soft on China vis-a-vis India? So is Trump more pro-China than pro-India? What do you think?
Okay, so Trump is going a little bit soft on China, but does that make Trump more pro-China compared to Trump being more pro-India? There can be a long answer to that. The short answer is no. And there's a reason why I'm saying that, because we'll probably take it up in later questions.
Well, that was short and sweet, Swasti. Thanks. But I think this might get a more detailed answer out of you because it's actually something you know quite a lot about. Karthik Parashar asks, how big is the difference between Rafale and Raptors? And wouldn't India be better off with Rafale?
Now, the difference between Rafales and Raptors. So Rafale is a French fighter jet. It is a 4.5 generation fighter jet, and F-22 Raptor is made by Lockheed Martin. It's an American fighter jet, and it's the world's most advanced 5th generation fighter jet that the world has ever had. Okay. Now, very quickly, what is the difference? Now, I'll run you through certain differences, and I also understand where this question is coming from. While I'm answering, I'll probably reflect a bit on that as well. See, first things first. Apart from the difference in generations that I will come to in terms of what is the difference, but F-22 is a very expensive aircraft to make. In fact, and in terms of capabilities as well, there's no match in capabilities. F-22 and Rafale, I mean, F-22 is very advanced. F-22 is so advanced that US has decided not to sell it to even its closest partners. US has never shared its technology with anybody. And it is so expensive that US has decided not to make more than 190 of those units. And out of those 190, perhaps 187 are the ones that are used by the US Air Force. The rest are prototypes, and then the US capped production because they're very expensive. Just to give you a sense of how expensive they are, a couple of Raptors, would cost about $1 billion.
Oh my
$1
God.
billion. Okay. So you can totally understand how much of money,
Yeah, and what an
is lying
investment
there.
that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I do understand, and now they're not making it anymore. In fact, you should know that the US has already embarked upon a sixth generation program, and it's, drones, etc. So they
Okay.
are also sort of evolving their strategy. Now, very quickly, I know where this question is coming from, and it's very interesting, Vandana, because often you hear from these wargaming exercises. NATO conducts these wargaming exercises they're having in different parts of the NATO allies, and often you hear that the Rafale actually locked the F-22, so the Rafale is more advanced. And there are a lot of news agencies also, and defense enthusiasts, and
That
who put
seems,
out it
yeah.
put this out on their social media handles, and those little videos saying that
Snippets.
the Rafale is so advanced, and they have literally locked a F-22 Raptor, even though Rafale is 4.5 and F-22 is the fifth generation. But what you need to understand is that when there is a war gaming happening, the settings are not that of a real war. Okay, the settings allowed in a war exercise, in a war gaming, or mock exercises, those settings do not allow for the BVR kills, which means that below visual range kills are just not allowed. What it means is that in a real world situation, if there were a real war between, say, a Rafale and a Raptor,
Right.
even before Rafale would see it, the Raptor would have locked a Rafale and would have launched its first attack. Okay, there is no way under the sun that 10 out of 10 times the Raptor would win. There is no chance, because the stealth and the sense of fusion, the situational awareness is so much better. There is no comparison. But you don't see that in a war gaming, because in a war gaming the BVR kills are disabled. So the settings are such that you have to merge your aircraft, and you have to do the dogfight.
Right.
Okay, so it is because of the settings, not because of the capabilities. I think that is a very crucial point that a lot of defense enthusiasts miss, because for that you have to really speak to a lot of fighter pilots themselves and people who are doing these technologies. So that is the one reason. Like I said, that for sure, in a real war situation, there is no chance that a Rafale would even see a F-22 Raptor before it gets destroyed. Now, very quickly, there are more comparisons that you should know in terms of, because you asked me for the difference. The price is a very, very obvious difference. Now, when I said a couple of Raptors cost about $1 billion, also understand that there is something called a bare cost. Bare cost means that an aircraft without any weapons can cost less. So, for example, the bare cost of a F-22 Raptor is about 300 and 50 million. Okay, but when you add more weapons, it becomes expensive. So that's how it goes to 500 million, and that's how two of them cost 1 billion. Compared to that, the bare cost of a Rafale is about 110 million, and if you were to add more weapons to it, it becomes 150 million. Similarly, by comparison, the bare cost of an F-35 is about 80 million, and then you add more weapons, it'll go up. And Su-57's bare cost is 50 million, and if you were to add weapons, it'll go up.
Right.
So definitely, if you go into this kind of a comparison, the Su-57s are cheaper.
Yeah.
So when you put it that way, you understand what is cheaper and what is not. But then it's not just the cost alone. I told you, it's about the weapons that are being carried. How lethal are they? And finally, there is also a concept which is called LCC, which is life cycle cost.
Right.
In easy parlance, I mean, in common parlance, it basically amounts to, when does your car require a service? So when does your aircraft require a service? How long will it run before its engines
Needs
or
to be,
hydraulic pumps or its spares need to be changed? And typically for the Western fighters, I mean, that LCC is better than the non-Western fighters.
Right.
And that also, if over a long period of time, the rate of exploitation is much higher, because you don't need to change its spares, very frequently. frequently. So those are the reasons. And the last point is about the difference in generation, that you should know that there are, basic, two things. Otherwise, it is a very long technical discussion. But two things. One is that between 4.5 and fifth generation, the 4.5 and the 5, the difference is that a the Raptor is much better, has much better stealth capabilities. So definitely much better stealth. I mean, very high stealth. And the other is their better situational awareness. So the pilot who's sitting in the aircraft, has much better situational awareness. And because of much better situational awareness and much higher stealth capabilities, it has much better sense of fusion.
Right.
And that was the reason when I said that in a real war, I mean, even before a Rafale could trace an F-22, it would have done its
Right.
kam tamam.
Right.
Okay, so those are the differences. Now, there's a second part to that question as well, which is
Wouldn't India be better off with Rafales?
so I have already answered this question in one of our episodes. And in short, for India, if we have to import, it makes sense for us to import Rafales because we already have the infra and we already have, a lot of other MRO facilities, etc. for the Rafales. Because we initially, when we asked the MOD to buy in the 2000s, we asked them to buy about 100 and more than 120, 130 aircrafts, but we got only 36. So we still have the capacity to absorb. Doesn't mean to say that India should be pushing for imports. Ultimately, India should be focusing on our AMCAs because, come on, let's face it, Rafales are still 4.5 and our AMCAs, they are fifth generation. But the question is, when will AMCAs come, etc. So that's not your question, but between, Raptors or F Series or Rafales, I mean, India simply has more, infra available to absorb more Rafales, so that's a comparative assessment.
Got it. We have another question from Karthik Parashar who points out that points our attention to what's happening with the Nepali students in Orissa right now. Do these incidents affect our relationship with neighbors severely, or are these incidents not looked upon as a big deal? Like, basically, I think he's asking about what kind of diplomatic weight does this kind of incident have?
Now, it's a good question, Karthik, and I'm happy that you're asking all these questions. See, and I think we all understand, Vandana, one off situation like this, one
Yeah.
off incident, isn't really a big deal. I mean, I just in the beginning told you this example with Qatar,
Yeah.
where 8 of India's ex Navy personnel were charged with the most serious
Yeah.
crime ever. That
Yeah,
they
they
said
could
that
have
you
been.
were spying for Israelis because we were making a
Yeah.
submarine. And the pardon was granted
Yeah.
because there were the right diplomatic outreach and the right diplomatic, so to say, effort around it. It's not about a one-off incident. It is about how we are treating that particular country or that particular relationship in toto. As far as Nepal is concerned, in the last episode, we went into the details of
Yeah.
what really is the problem. See, from Nepalese perspective, they do feel, hurt sometimes about India's big brother attitude. And what has happened in Orissa is a classic example.
Yeah.
Because what has happened? There was a girl, she committed suicide because she was harassed by the boyfriend or whatever, but that's what at least we saw in the papers. Now, it is about how this thing was basically treated. So she commits a suicide. About 200 Nepalese student, or they come out on dharna, and the authorities, instead of giving them a hearing or giving them a patient hearing, they tell them to just leave the campus
Yeah,
and
they
go
put them
back.
down, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then when the situation gets out of hand, when the Nepalese embassy tweeted, when the Nepalese embassy stepped in and they said that we are sending our people to help our citizens get back to or make them feel safe, etc. So when it kind of spiraled out of control, then the KIIT authorities started tweeting that, oh, please come back, we didn't mean that. But by then the damage had happened.
Yeah.
And please also remember that all these countries, they have very strong anti-India factions as
Yeah.
well, who are always looking for these
Disturbances to kind of,
disturbances to sort of capitalize
capitalize.
on, okay, and to basically exploit these vulnerabilities. So I think so these are situations where India should have been a bit more proactive, and these go a long way in determining, because that's exactly what the Nepalese say, that you
Yeah.
always have this big brother
And you
attitude
treat
towards
us
us.
like
Yeah,
second class,
you're second class
and
citizens.
that was sort of reflected by the way the
And it
university
was, yeah,
administration treated
yeah,
the case.
yeah, exactly. So it's not a one-off thing, right? It's about how you treat it in toto. And I mean, somewhere I think we have to be careful about that. Yeah.
Thanks, Swasti. So here we have two questions that I've kind of clubbed together, both of which I'm reading is, some of the apprehension that's been perpetuated by Trump's politics and what his impact on geopolitics would be like. So we have
Hmm.
one from at Tanusu who
Mhm.
asks, if Trump is able to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine, will we see a Russia-US relationship on a mend?
Hmm.
What shift do you expect, and how does that affect India? And Swasti, we have another question from at Ravi89 Rules, who's asking another dimension of the same kind of issue. How does India look at the European security architecture? If the US cuts separate deals with Russia and then China, how will India and Europe and the EU's relationship play out? So will the India-EU relationship improve essentially?
Yeah, so I mean, let me just connect it to the
Mm-hmm.
question that was earlier asked about, does Trump look more pro-China or something? And I said
Right.
no,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
then okay,
Yeah.
this is the time to
Yeah, that's the
elaborate.
time.
Now, very quickly, see, there is evidence enough now, and especially in the last week, the way things have spiraled out of control between the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and Ukraine on the one
Mm.
hand, and suddenly there is there's
It looks
you
like,
know, U.S. and
yeah.
Russia behaving like long lost lovers that have
Yeah.
found each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, so very quickly, coming to the serious bit of the answer is that perhaps it does seem for now that US is trying to drive a wedge between Russia
Mm.
and China because he wants to deliver on his promise of bringing the war to an end.
Right.
It does seem like that. But does he have a plan? I don't think he still
Mm.
has a plan. And like most of the statements, if you go by the kind of statements that Donald Trump has made after he's become president, I think you will understand that there's never been more strategic cacophony,
Yeah.
okay, than
That's a good
has
way to put it.
perpetuated
Mm.
after Donald Trump has become president. His remarks on Gaza, his remarks on Greenland, his remarks on Mexico, Canada,
Mm-hmm.
Governor Trudeau, Gulf
Panama.
of, I mean,
Yeah.
Panama,
Gulf.
it's unending.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, he's having a deal with India. On the other hand, he's publicly berating India as
Yeah.
being a tariff abuser. On the one hand, every single important post in his cabinet is occupied by China hawks. And on the other hand, he's saying Xi Jinping is a great guy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is that there's too much strategic cacophony. I don't think he still has a plan to end the war in Ukraine, but it does look as that his intention is that he wants to deliver on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he's all over the place right now. From India's perspective, we must tread carefully. We are treading carefully. In fact, if you see that recently on both these, peacekeeping efforts, not really peacekeeping, but at least peace building efforts, one was a
Mm-hmm.
prisoners of war swap, which was facilitated by UAE.
Yeah.
This was, I think, a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And then very recently, the American and the Russian talks
Mm.
were held in Riyadh in Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia. So you had Saudi Arabia and UAE at the forefront of these peace building measures or whatever, but you did not really see any statement coming from
Mm.
India. I think India is simply being cautious. Strategic caution and strategic patience, I think these are the two key words from India's perspective. What should India do? In the longer run, see, I do not see that Donald Trump is going to change his stand towards China. In fact,
Mm.
I'm of the view that there could very soon be a time when Donald Trump and Elon Musk actually have a fallout over how Elon Musk prefers China because of business
Yeah.
interest
I
and
wouldn't
how
be surprised.
Donald
Yeah.
Trump is
Mm.
trying to contain
Mm-hmm.
how China is been challenging U.S. supremacy,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But what I do see is that in the India is managing its ties with China separately. This is just to basically better take care of the uncertainty around. And on the other hand, India is also deepening its ties with the U.S., which is already happening, so that even in case there is a rapprochement,
Mm-hmm.
let's say there is a
Yeah.
hypothetical rapprochement, India, I mean, is not standing to lose, or India is not caught by surprise.
Right.
Okay, because so that's the China thing. I
Mm.
don't see him becoming pro-China, but there could be a tactical kind of a rapprochement, and for that, India must be ready. And if I read it carefully, India is already making efforts
Yeah.
to be in the game.
Mm.
So that's one. The other thing is about Russia. Now, from India's perspective, it benefits India if US-Russia relations were to improve, for
Mm.
the simple reason that India's relationship with Russia is quite important. But despite that's one part, so it will lessen pressure on
Yeah, it
India.
releases the
Okay,
pressure.
yeah. But having said that, is it tantamount to saying that India-Russia relationship can go back to
Mm.
normal? I mean, go back to pre-Ukraine days.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's not possible for certain technical reasons, and I'll just tell you briefly what those technical reasons are. I have been arguing for a long time that from India's perspective, regardless of the outcome of the war in Ukraine, I mean, whether the 20 or 22% of Ukrainian land is with Ukraine or with Russia, or a ceasefire or
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Mm-hmm.
a no man's land or whatever, it that doesn't impact India so much. What really impacts India, that in the process Russia is getting pushed with China, and this is not just a diplomatic support that Russia gets from China. The support is technical, the support is on semiconductors, the support is on technology, the support is on chips, on everything, or the fiscal support, how both the sides are trying to prop up each other's currency in the larger fight against de-dollarization and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is that because in the 3 years Russia has gotten pushed with China, of course, from India's perspective, we will try and keep our relationship with Russia intact. We are doing it. But the weapons relationship, I do not see thriving. Also, because if you see that by contrast, the India-US weapons relationship has been deepening. I mean, the new age defense relationship. And if we really enter into the kind of deals that the US is offering to us and planning to sell to us, it would be very difficult for us to go back for advanced platforms for Russia. Technical, I mean, like basic military hardware, of course, we will keep buying because we are still largely Russian origin weapons. But that's one thing. So what we will see, in my opinion, is a kind of a shift in the relationship. So from the weapons sector, I think the centerpiece of the relationship will be connectivity, perhaps. And more than connectivity, it's the energy trade, because the oil that we keep buying from Russia, we refine and we sell it back to Europe. Perhaps that will continue because Europe is not going to let go of its sanctions. In fact, the latest tranche of sanctions, the 16th tranche of sanctions, has been announced very recently. So I think this is how I look at it. But I think India is consequentially hedging its bets, which is the right thing to do, because in this grand bargain, I think everybody is only looking for their selfish interest, and so should India. As far as Donald Trump, we should wait, because he keeps changing his statements, and his cabinet also, especially some of them that are very famous for giving statements and then backtracking, they have to learn to be taken seriously. They have to stop behaving as activists, and they have to stop behaving as influencers, and they have to start behaving like statesmen. I think for the world to take them seriously. So I would rather just end it there and say, okay, let's be just patient and let's just let them wear themselves out.
Yeah, I mean, Swasti keeps saying this: you have to take Trump, don't take Trump literally, take him seriously. And I think that's a really good summary of the way we should approach things. Yeah, and the second part of this was at the European security architecture, right? So will EU follow suit and become more pragmatic and less sermonic? Will India and EU defense relationships improve?
Okay.
This is what Ravi 89 Rules asks.
Now, that's a great question, because I think when we are talking about India's strategic ties, strategic imagination, somehow the European Union doesn't really fit in. But let me just begin answering this question by this piece of information for you, that the largest ever EU delegation is coming to India towards the end of February. It consists of not only the top two leaders, which is like Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission chief, as well as the foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, but also 21 commissioners, and including the first ever commissioner on space and defense, whose name is Andreas Kulbilius. And this is something unprecedented. So this is going to be a mini G20 moment.
Yeah, they're all coming down.
So it's like 2 plus 21, and each would have their own escort. So it's, I don't know, it's a logistics mess. So we will see that in Delhi. Now the thing is that regardless of I mean of what is happening in the world, there are certain key takeaways that we must remember. That with the US getting more uncertain, well, of course we are going to deepen our ties with the US, but because of the uncertainty factor and because of the all the apprehension around it, it also makes sense not only for India but also for the European Union to bank less on the US. Of course, transatlantic ties are in trouble. There's very, very, very bad blood between the two sides right now. Both are giving absolutely wild statements against each other. It makes sense for the European Union also to deepen its ties with India, and they've been very serious about it. The question is, does it take a strategic personality? That it has an economic personality, everybody knows. That I mean, the European Union, the European Defense Bank, it's investment bank, sorry, EIB. Those have been one of the major tools with which India has been embarking upon its so much of its progress. Okay, everybody keeps talking about how Japan funded the metros, but all the recent metros, etc., they've all been done by German money and through the EIB, etc. So what I'm saying is that developmental partner EU has always been. Economic partner, there's more than 200 billion worth of trade between us, and most of that trade and a lot of that trade is in, again, our trade surplus. So it's very obvious. I don't need to get into that, and I also don't need to tell you, but perhaps only briefly, that we are negotiating an FTA which is now broken down into three parts. There's one part which is an FTA on goods and services. There's another one on the bilateral investment treaty, and a third one on the treaty on geographic indicators. The problem out there is CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, a kind of a condition that the EU is attaching on its imports, and India's exports would then suffer. But anyway, that apart, now let me talk about the strategic dimension. I think what many people do not know, that we have three distinct verticals when we talk about EU India strategic dimension. The out of those three, the most developed one is definitely the maritime security
Mm.
domain, because in the maritime security domain, India has been on board on Operation Atalanta, which are EU
Right.
naval force mission, which came 2008, and those years, that was again piracy and all of that, and India really has a lot of convergence on those issues. India also was also on board on Aspides, which is a
Mm.
very recent EU NAVFOR mission, and there's also a tool called the Coordinated Maritime Presence, and India and the EU have had very, I would say, meaningful discussions on it.
Mm.
India has also been on board on a lot of other tools called the SEWA, which is enhancing security in and with Asia. The tools called Cremario, which is on protection of the critical maritime routes, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what I'm trying to say, and that convergence is not coming out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
That convergence is coming because
From a
India's
history.
Indo-Pacific Oceans strategy, or Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, the seven pillars of IPOI, and EU's Indo-Pacific strategy seven
Mm.
pillars have a lot of convergence. There are some very technical differences on how the two sides define the IUU, etc.
Okay.
But apart from that, they are very, very similar. And
Mm.
because of that, the convergence is great, because both the sides look at Indo-Pacific as a theater of great power rivalry, where they should be giving a third way forward. So
Mm.
I think there's massive convergence there. Does it mean to say that it's as good as India has with some of the member states like France?
Mm.
No, no, that's not true. But what I'm saying is that out of the three dimensions, the maritime security dimension is working very well.
Well. Mm.
This, and we have maritime security dialogues, etc., etc. The second thing that I want to say related to that is that the EU, I think in 2023. End of 2023 or early 2024, actually appointed its first ever defense attache to
Mm.
India, and India is still to appoint its counterpart in Brussels, but
Mm-hmm.
that itself is a progression.
Yeah.
Okay, then thirdly, then the other vertical there is the EU defense industrial strategy. After the war in Ukraine, the European Union is trying to emerge as a security actor.
Mm.
Now, of course, there are many problems. I'll take many hours to tell you how many problems are there, but there are many problems, and
Mm.
in fact, the Europeans, there's a joke in European circles these days that in Brussels, after some hundreds of years or maybe 50 years, they're
Mm.
saying that in Brussels city center, they are going to put up a statue of Donald Trump because they will owe their existence to
To
him, because
him.
he pushed them
Them
so
to
hard
sort
to
of,
actually
yeah.
emerge as a security actor who can
Yeah.
really stand on their own feet. So
Yeah.
it's a joke, nobody
Yeah.
knows whether
Yeah.
that can happen or not, but Donald Trump is pushing very, very hard, for the Europeans to take care of their own
Mm.
security. Very quickly, for the first ever time, they have something called a European Defense Industrial Base, which is a part of the European Defense Industrial Program. And why I'm telling you is that the European side and the Indian side have had very, I would say, comprehensive conversations on how India can play a role. The logic is very simple. The
Mm.
EU wants to militarize,
Right.
okay? And because each one of those 27 member states are now ramping up on their military modernization, the thing is they need the equipment,
Right.
okay? And their state of the art defense industries also have
It's,
clients all over the world.
yeah.
So basically, the American industries alone, or the EU domestic industries, cannot rise up to that
Mm.
occasion, and they are looking for exports. And South Korea is already doing that.
Mm.
We can do it with the individual member states. Of course, we are doing it with France, with Poland, with so many other countries. But at the EU wide level, there is something which is called common procurement. So they have a plan for it, that if two or three EU countries come together and place an order, the EU
Then
gives
they
some
can.
kind of a subsidy,
Right.
okay, on that, so it becomes cheaper. Now the conversations with India is that, can India then start exporting not only to the individual member countries, which has
But
already
to.
happened, but at the EU wide level also.
Right.
But then there are certain bottlenecks out there, because the EU is very much into rules and
Mm-hmm.
regulations. So you have to sign
As you
this, you
know.
have to sign
Yeah.
on that, and sign on this. So India says, okay, bhai, hum itna sign nahi kar sakte. Let me just go on with my trade with
And
France and
just
with
get it
Poland
done.
and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that
Less
is a very
hassle.
important thing. And my hunch is that the EU really needs it, and we have to also co-produce and start exporting more. It's a win-win
Mm.
situation, frankly. And the third vertical of our strategic ties is the European Space Agency,
Mm.
because even though it is the cooperation with this between ISRO and the ESA, the European Space Agency, isn't as thriving as the one we have with the French Space Agency, but they have also helped us a lot with our launch. In fact, the Commissioner for Security, Defense and Space, who's coming to India, has a clear mandate to deepen talks around defense and
And
space.
space.
Yeah. So this
Interesting.
is what is, and this is in the both sides' interest. So I do see that regardless of what happens in the war, in fact, it kind of also accelerates the fact that both the EU and India should explore these possibilities, because
Mhm.
there's a massive market out there that
Mm.
India can really exploit.
Got it. Well, I'm sure we'll be discussing the outcomes of the EU
Of
delegation's
course,
visit
yeah.
in our upcoming episodes. But I think we'll end it here for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Swasti, and thank you so much for watching.
It was a pleasure.